dumb things.
That's true. You can't.
You can
Okay,
try, but you can't.
let me get to some more of these because people are definitely interested in you and the opportunity to have a you could say a direct communication, but it's going through essentially me. But these are the questions that I think are valid towards you. Anyway, Jamie Vick, is it true that a body can be healed through sound?
Well, actually, it's a combination of light and sound. So let me give you an example. I mentioned the etheric plane and the etheric plane surgeons. So let's say you go to the etheric plane and you have a medical problem, especially one that's incurable. So you go to the etheric plane, and there are techniques to do that. And my the Astral Voyaging Program CD album deals with that, of course. So now you meet these. They look like giant tadpoles. They're weird-looking entities, and they take you into an OR. This is a fifth-dimensional OR,
Hmm.
and then they use light and sound, weird sounds, and all kinds of light, like lasers kind of technology. But it's fifth-dimensional, so it's hard to relate to it on the Earth plane. And then they would heal the body. So let me show you how that works. We have spiritual bodies. Let's say you go to the astral plane in an out-of-body experience trial, okay? Your soul is now going to occupy the astral body, hence the astral plane. If you go to the causal plane, you occupy the causal body. You get it? Every body for different dimensions. So the etheric body is the only one of our spiritual bodies that's physically identical to our earth plane body. If you go to the astral plane in your spiritual body, your body is going to be taller, younger looking, and leaner than your physical body. It's not going to be it's going to look similar, but not the same. But the etheric plane body is identical. In fact, if you were able to have your astral body destroyed on the astral plane, it wouldn't affect your life on the earth plane. But if you ever had anything happen to your etheric body, you would die instantly. You don't have to worry about it because nobody has ever died because their etheric body was destroyed. It never gets destroyed. But it is critical for life. So it's the most important spiritual body. And the etheric plane is the most important dimension to travel to if you want to heal. But in answer to the question, yes, they use sound, but not just sound. They use light also.
Interesting. And you know what? That makes sense because when you hear a lot of these new technologies, people being healed in lights, or even people that deal with, say, the Annabelle. You heard of Annabelle, right? The doll,
Right?
the
Okay.
inanimate doll that's supposedly possessed and has caused all these
Right.
problems. Well, the person that's dealt to deal with it, clean the cage, etc. He, you know, puts a veil of light around him. He envisions it, the light and the healing light, and that way he's protected. But and on another level is you also hear about these technologies that the futurists, the ETs, whichever you want to call it, in what they do, body experiments or surgeries, it's always involving light.
Right, but let me clarify. That's correct, but let me tell you what the difference is here. So people who are psychically attacked, massively attacked, the reason why humans commit suicide, which I think is a terrible thing to do for many reasons, is because we're the only species that's psychically attacked. No animal commits suicide except for man. Okay,
It's
so there's
true.
a reason for that
It's
because
true.
psychic attack is so extreme that they can't deal with it. So white light protection is fine if you got a very simple little attack. That's fine, but not for the big case. If you got bipolar, major depression, or really heavy things happening in your life, a white light protection is not going to work by itself. What you need to do is much more advanced techniques. So your listeners, if they're interested, if they go to my homepage and look up the Spiritual Growth Experience CD album, this is designed specifically for more middle to more advanced psychic attack issues. Various techniques, ending with the advanced out-of-body experience technique. So there's more than just white light protection. But all my CDs have a white light protection on there. But if you have psychic attack, especially a serious case, which would be like bad luck, everything happening wrong, aches and pains of no medical origin, these kinds of things, then you would need the Spiritual Growth Experience CDL because that's pretty heavy. Plus, I obviously could work with people myself through the computer. And I wrote a book called Protected by the Light, which goes into extreme examples of how you can do what I call psychic self-defense techniques to learn about what psychic attack is, how to prevent it, and what you can do in your daily life to decrease the percentage of psychic attacks in your life.
There's this movie. It's written or it's directed by, is it Nolan Ryan, who did Interstellar? Geez, why am I blanking out? It's the one with Leonardo DiCaprio, and what they're doing is essentially going into dreams and creating or trying to affect the subconscious to implant a thought. And so
right.
yeah, you remember that movie? And the
Well, yeah,
antagonist.
I also remember the Dreamscape movie too, where they were trying to use the dreams, to do all kinds of weird things. We're trying to use the dream levels. Interesting enough, the theoretical foundation of that is actually accurate, because the dream, when you go into a dream level, dream is an out-of-body experience. It's a real dimension. It's not the Earth plane, but it is a real dimension, and it really doesn't affect us on our dimension. So if you get killed on the astral plane, it doesn't affect your Earth plane body, except making you anxious and uptight. But yes. But you can use the dream levels for positive usage. You can use it for creativity. Do you know that scientific studies have shown that 80% of scientific achievements of things that are great achievements in life, as well as artistic developments like artists and painters, musicians, etc., all occur during the dream levels. So 80% of our breakthroughs, creativity, as well as scientific breakthroughs, which is a form of creativity, occur during the dream level. So people can use the dream levels at night, and I train people to do that. If you have a creative block, like you're a writer or painter or whatever, I work with those, actors, or just people in their life, they want to do something in their business, a business plan. I call this karmic capitalism. They can tap into their higher self in the fifth dimension, and then they create plans and then manifest them on the earth plane. So the fifth dimension is everything. There is a case I'd like to just mention a minute here. This is a teleportation case, which I'd like to describe. It's mentioned in my Exploring the Fifth Dimension book, and it's really kind of cool, and I would like to just to describe it. I was working with this teenage girl about 10, 15 years ago. So let me tell you the story here. Two 9-year-old classmates were walking home from school in Texas when suddenly an older teenager around 18 ran up to them, pushed them both aside, and this teenager was wearing a light blue tennis outfit. Just as she pushed them both, these girls aside, I call them Brenda and Amy, a car driven by a drunken teenager jumped the curb where they were walking and would have killed these girls by hitting them head on if it wasn't for this teenager. Okay? Now, Brenda and Amy turned to thank this teenage girl, who immediately disappeared into thin air. All right? Now, 10 years later, I had the pleasure of working with Amy. I call her not her real name. She related the story to me. And what brought this to her attention was that she remained friends with Brenda all those years, and they recently decided to play tennis. So Amy picked Brenda up at her parents' home one day. Remember, she's about 18. And she saw Brenda wearing the exact same blue tennis outfit worn by the teenager who saved both their lives 10 years earlier.
Wow.
Brenda told Amy that she blacked out for a short time earlier that day and had a dream that she had saved the lives of two young girls. So now Amy realized that it was the 19-year-old Brenda that saved them. Brenda entered a tear in the fabric of space-time, doing a spontaneous teleportation, traveled back in time 10 years to save herself and Amy from the drunken teenager in the car. So you might say Brenda had become a time traveler deep in the heart of Texas by way of teleportation.
A chrononaut, essentially, right?
What now? I didn't hear what you said.
A chrononaut, essentially.
Well, yeah, of course. Anybody travels in time as a chrononaut, sure. So she was a chrononaut, too. Now, what this means is that the teleportation can also take you back or forward in time, not just in the current dimension, too. So it's an important aspect here. A good example, and let me show you the most documented and the most fun case of teleportation ever recorded. This occurred on the evening of October 21st, 1593. So let me tell you what happens here. Remember the technology in those days, which was like zero, right?
Nothing, yeah.
A Spanish soldier by the name of Gil Perez suddenly appeared in the plaza in front of the Palace of Mexico City. His uniform was that of the palace. His uniform was very different from that of the palace guards, and he carried a different gun. Now, he was from Manila, the Philippines. In those days, the Mexican government, their soldiers had different uniforms and guns than the Manila, the Philippines. Remember, Spain owned the Philippines and Mexico at that time, right?
That's right.
As colonies. Okay, so what happens is that this man was arrested immediately because he was like weird. This guy is from a Manila uniform. There's no other people from Manila, it's just him, right? So they take him to jail, And they said, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm from Manila. I'm from the Philippines." And he was very nervous, and he said that the governor was murdered, and it wasn't his fault. He tried to protect him, and he was upset. And the guy says, "Manila." He says, "That's 9,000 miles away. You're loco. What's crazy? What's the matter with you?" So they put him into jail, and they had a priest give him an exorcism because in those days, they thought that he was possessed. Okay, so he's in jail. 2 months go by. Now it's around Christmas time. Now, what Spain would do is they would send the ships from Manila all the way around to Mexico as part of their, routines. And when they came there to visit them, they would also bring the news. So 2 months later, around Christmas time, the ship arrives in Mexico City, and the soldiers were there, and they said, "What's going on?" They said, "Well, we bring some news. The governor, one Don Gomez Perez das Maranas, was murdered 2 months before." And they asked him for the exact date. And he said, "Well, it was, it was actually October 24th. It was actually the morning of October 25th." And they said, "Really? Well, we have somebody we'd like you to meet." So they took him to the jail, and they introduced him to Gil Perez. And the guy says, "That's Gil Perez. He's one of our soldiers."
Wow.
How did Gil Perez go from Manila, Philippines, 9,000 miles away? He actually went back in time by 12 hours because he went from the 25th of October in the morning to the 24th in the evening of 1593. Not only was this case documented by the local authorities, which means the historians were involved, but the Catholic Church also documented, because remember, there was a priest and an exorcism. Okay? So here's an example of teleportation back in time, 400 plus years ago, fully documented by both theology and by historians. That's the most documented case of teleportation.
There's this one. It's a case that's always really got to me. It's essentially it either proves another dimension or another plane, right? And what it was is in the 50s, a man traveled to Tokyo, and when he got to customs, he had a passport, identification, everything. And the country of origin was something like Taured, Taured.
Right. It was supposed to be in Europe. It didn't
Yeah,
exist.
and he said it was like...
They put it, wait, it gets better. They put him in a hotel room. He was like under guard, and all of a sudden he dematerialized and disappeared.
That's right. You
right?
know that case.
I remember the case.
That still fascinates me because, he was perplexed, and when he pointed on the map, like you said, Europe, it was like the region of France somewhere. And he said that that empire had been there for 800 to 1,000 years, and he was just perplexed, like you said, just gone.
One of the things we learned about that is how incompetent our customs services are, too.
That's true. That's very true.
Yes, so that's a famous case. But there's another case that's of interest, too, and this one is kind of fun. This occurred in... now, this is interesting. There's a guy named Charles W. Ingersoll. He was a businessman from Cloquet, Minnesota. In 1948... he had this vision in mind. He wanted to visit the Grand Canyon to go on vacation. Mm-hmm. He was obsessed with it, right? But he was unable to make the trip that year due to his business responsibilities, so he had to put it off. Finally, in 1955, Ingersoll purchases a brand-new Bosley 35mm slide camera made in 1955, note the year, and he decided to go to the Grand Canyon, okay? So he goes to the Grand Canyon, and he has a good trip, right? And he comes back home. And now he goes to his photography store, and he buys, in the old days, he used to have these Castle Films, was a company that would give you like travel logs, like today we do it online. But so Castle Films would have travel logs of every country you could imagine. People would buy these things like 8mm films, and they would look to see whether they want to go to a certain country, just like we go on YouTube to do it now. So he buys this Castle film about the Grand Canyon, that was copyrighted in 1948. You know how copyrights are done on any kind of film, right? And they're rather strict standards, right? While he's looking at the film, he sees himself in the film in 1948 with his 1955 Bosley 35mm slide camera. How does that happen unless he teleported back in time? That's another famous case.
There's another one, too, and I don't know when this occurred, but the period was, it's assuming to be late 1800s, where a man was walking in a highway, And what he saw in the distance was a man who was looking back at him just as perplexed as he was, except the person he was looking at seemed to be wearing clothes of 100 years older. The rifle was 100 years older, and it's like the two people met at a crossroads, and yet they're from two different timelines. And I don't know what happened after that, but this was a famous case. This was actually put out by when Time magazine decided to start exploring the unknown, and they had a little series of books. This was in the first volume, and I remember that. I really stuck out in my mind. It's like, wait a second, 100 years apart.
These are called time shift. There's a famous case. There's a lot of cases in England. There's a case where a guy was, it was like in the 1960s, and he's driving on this lonely road in England, somewhere in southern England, and he's a coin collector. So he goes to this little town, and he needs to buy some little holders for his coins, right? So he sees like a general store, the equivalent of a general store. He goes in there, and everybody's dressed weirdly. They're dressed like from the 1930s, okay? And he goes up to the counter and he sees these coin slots, and he looks at the woman and says, "I'd like to buy about 20 of these coin slots. How much are they?" And she said it was like a couple of pence, which is like a really ridiculously low price.
Nothing, yeah.
He says, "Wow, that's pretty cool." So he buys it. Remember now, these people were dressed like in the 30s. So now he says, "This is really weird." And as he's driving, he sees the cars were like 1930s cars, right? So something's wrong here, right? So now he goes back on the highway, going back to home, and all of a sudden everything looks normal. It's the 1960s again, right? So he takes those bag of coin holders, and he goes back home, and he's going to put the coins in there, and all of a sudden they look really brown and very decrepit, and they disappear.
Aged.
In other words, they were like 30 years old. Okay?
Wow.
There's an example of what we call a time shift. And there are many cases of that. By the way, the two places in the world that are really weird when it comes to spontaneous cases of teleportation, because that was a teleportation back in time too, is England and Argentina. Those where most of the cases occur for some reason.
I wonder if it's because of ley lines or something like that.
Well, yeah, but there are ley lines in by the Great Pyramid of Giza and all the megaliths.
Stonehenge, yeah, that's true.
Okay?
That's true.
Now, you're talking about England when it comes to Stonehenge, but there are ley lines all over the world, so we don't think it's the ley line issue. I think it's just that the tears in the fabric of space-time seem to be more concentrated statistically in those two countries. That would be my reading of it.
There's some more questions for you, and I feel bad if I don't get
to
some of
these
ahead. Here. This is from Lasha Senyak. He goes, how do you explain the ascension of Jesus? He became light, didn't he?
All right, well, Jesus would be considered to be a master, and what that would mean would be he simply left the physical body and merged with his higher self, the superconscious mind, which comes from the God energy complex, and becomes light, which is energy. No body anymore, right? This is not mummification, So and people do that. They eventually, if you do this right, you're going to merge with your higher self, and you're going to ascend. That's what ascension is.
This next one here, it goes back to, and I have an idea what the answer would be, but let me ask you anyway. How can we tell the difference between a friendly gray and an unfriendly gray?
Okay, well, the friendly gray is going to be the one that's going to make you feel positive. It's going to represent, I wouldn't say unconditional love like a spirit guide or an angel would, but it's going to be very helpful to you. A unfriendly gray is going to try to get sperm samples or egg samples, and it's going to try to do some nasty stuff. It's going to give you that look with that eye, that hypnotic look, they call that, and it's going to be kind of creepy. The nice thing about grays, though, is that they're really wimpy kind of creatures. Anyone could beat the tar out of a gray, okay? They weigh like 70 pounds.
Yeah,
and they don't like
violence,
half
our height, too.
Okay? So you can easily defeat a gray on a one-on-one, okay? By the way, if you want to keep away from grays, just wear a lot of iron. They don't like iron, and they don't like St. John's wort either. That herb is a real no-no to them. It's like garlic to a vampire. So there are ways. But if you ever run, here's an example. Let's say somebody's about to be abducted, and there's a gray or a couple of grays. Sometimes they get in groups. All you have to do is say, "Get out of my sight, you gray freak." Just curse at them, yell and scream. They'll disappear. They do not deal with violence or any kind of negativity. They want you to be vulnerable and passive and wimpy about it.
Yeah,
So
and have fear because they feed off the fear.
right.
You know,
Just like, for example, like I give you an example. I'll show you how human nature works. Let's say that you live in a countryside or whatever, and let's say you have a pet dog, and all of a sudden in your backyard you see a coyote. Now a coyote is going to want to kill and eat your dog, right? All you have to do is yell at the coyote and they disappear.
and they do.
They don't
That's
deal
right.
with humans. They hate humans, okay? They are afraid of us like anything. Even though they're pretty big, they're a good-sized dog, or canine, so to speak. But they will disappear, and greys function like coyotes. If you yell and scream at them, they'll leave. They will not confront. They don't beat you up. They don't have any weapons to, like Star Trek laser beams. They don't have any of that.
What I was thinking, too, as part of the answer, is to look for those that are wearing the jumpsuits with the triangle, because then you know
Yeah, but
they're
suppose
friendly.
you don't have one. So, suppose you have a current century ET. What are you going to say? Would you please exchange yourself with a futuristic one?
No, it's not going to happen, yeah.
Okay? I want to meet your futuristic cousin, not you, okay? It doesn't work that way.
Okay, let's see here. This is from Jamie Vick. How can you tell the difference between energy vampires and just negative people?
Well, and negative people are by definition energy vampires. It's a question of degree. All right? Now, what you can do, it doesn't matter how negative people are. I have people that I'm exposed to in my life that are negative. They don't bother me. For one thing, I'm protected. I'm psychically protected, and I'm an empowered dude. So if you are protected, the energy vampires, you can't change an energy vampire. They're going to be that way. That's who they are. Just think of people in your family. Forget about people, friends. Look at your own family. If you're an adult and you've known people, cousins, uncles, aunts, whatever, do they ever change their behavior over the years?
No.
People, human nature doesn't change, okay? Not unless there's one heck of a reason for it, or they've gone through some major therapeutic approach, which is rare. No, people are always people. They are who they are. You can always tell. One thing you can tell about people is the behavior and the voice never changes. If you watch an old actor from 1950s in a movie, and you see if that person is alive now and they look totally different, their voice is always the same. That's how you could tell an actor.
That's true. That's absolutely
Voice never
true.
changes.